This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, my name is Paul Cheragino. I am an ecologist at the NOAA Fisheries Restoration Center in the Pacific region. And this is a presentation that I have given to members of what we call the coordination community. And that includes ecosystem recovery coordinators at the Puget Sound Partnership, lead entity coordinators working in salmon recovery, the lead integrating organization coordinators working in the National Estuary Program, and also Marine Resource Committee coordinators. So this community of folks are in a unique position in Puget Sound recovery in that they are familiar with the state and federal infrastructure that drives Puget Sound recovery, but they're also very familiar with the people working on the ground in the projects that directly restore and protect ecosystems. And so they're in a unique position to support improvements in how we do business in ecosystem recovery. So I have three things I really wanted to achieve. I wanted to give you a little background on how we got where we are today, introduce some concepts around Gemba Kaizen, and also offer an outline for how we might do continuous improvement in Puget Sound recovery with the resources that we have right now, without creating a new system or some new infrastructure, but rather just using what we have right now to start improving how we do business together. So in the background, I'm here today because of a sequence of events that really began in 2014. I was invited to be staff to a process called coordinated investment that was initiated by the regional director of NOAA Fisheries, EPA administrator, as well as the Puget Sound Partnership executive, who brought together state and federal agency executives from around Puget Sound and asked a simple question: how can we do our work of ecosystem recovery better together? And a lot of that discussion over a number of meetings focused on our discretionary systems like grants and regulation, and not our core financial, how we distribute funds, but rather how do we make decisions around how we use all of our various authorities, and how can we coordinate our authorities so that they work better together. And out of that process actually came a grant coordination work group led by the Recreation and Conservation Office and State Ecology that is still operating today, that I participate in. And in particular, one of the lessons I think that we learned through exploring how to improve our state and federal system is that it's very important to understand how our various programs and authorities play out in local environments. And so as part of that work, the Snohomish Sustainable Land Strategy was selected as a willing guinea pig. And I spent time working in that local environment asking, how can we improve the operating environment created by state and federal programs? And the Snohomish SLS developed 7 pilot projects that I have been working on in various ways since then. And one of those pilot projects was to try to get better and more efficient at starting and developing and running improvement projects. So it was to standardize and institutionalize how we do this work of improvement over time, and with the local teams recognizing that it was laborious. It was very effortful to try and change or improve a mixture of state and federal policies, and so that we would be better at recovery if we could become more efficient at improvement itself. So our opportunity here is I have worked with the Ecosystem Coordination Board on this improvement process concept. The Ecosystem Coordination Board has a broad range of representatives for all across the Puget Sound recovery community, and so serves as a great forum for trying to solve problems. And in fact, that is its current self-image, is that it wants to become more functional at supporting problem solving in Puget Sound recovery. So in working with the Ecosystem Coordination Board, we pointed towards this coordinator community as playing maybe a special role in facilitating that improvement process. However, there was concern about whether or not that coordination community had the capacity or time or labor to be able to do this work. And so this presentation is the beginning of investigating that question. It is a part of an offer from the Ecosystem Coordination Board, or a request to this coordination community to voluntarily develop a continuous improvement approach. And the ECB has already reviewed and endorsed the A3 process. And this is a process that has emerged from lean management and the Toyota production system and Kaizen Gemba. And it is well supported within the manufacturing community. And I will talk about that somewhat. And part of the purpose of this presentation is to introduce these concepts of Kaizen Gemba to the community of practice that hasn't necessarily been exposed to those ideas, even though it's very common in the manufacturing world. In particular, the ECB is already experimenting with this process through a project on culvert regulatory coordination, and they've asked the Puget Sound coordination community to explore how we could do this more efficiently in the future. So there's really two tests underway right now that I am staffing. One is in developing a strategy, sort of a standard approach to creating and reviewing culvert applications. And this is not to change the regulations or authorities or requirements currently governing culvert replacement, but rather to standardize how a local entity can apply for a culvert application review and know that they're covering as many bases as they need to cover. The second test is focusing on how we look at budgets across our grant programs, both state and federal grant programs, and looking at ways of standardizing budget language and budget structure in a way that makes it more efficient for local project developers to develop large, complicated projects that ultimately will require multiple grants to implement over the project lifecycle. And so this is also being supported by the grant coordination work group as well. So these are active tests. What we're looking at today, however, is how do we get better at developing improvement projects and identifying sources of waste and ultimately solving problems as a recovery community. A lot of what I'm going to present comes from this Gemba Kaizen concept. And I even use the Japanese characters to honor the origins of these ideas, really developed during the redevelopment of the Japanese industrial economy following World War II. And it really involved a mixture of American industrialists and statisticians working in collaboration with Japanese, developing a unique approach to managing a manufacturing environment. It's both a social system and a technical system, and it's really been dominant in global manufacturing for perhaps the past 60 years. It's oriented towards trying to use design and development of products to satisfy the values of customers. So it's very focused on customers and their values. It's oriented to the place where the work happens on the factory floor, so to speak, which uses where the word Gemba comes from. It's dedicated to an incremental continuous improvement process that engages the whole working community. Not just management, but also the workers in the factory. And it achieves this improvement through the development and continuous review of standards. And these aren't standards as a means of control, but sort of a way of sharing the information about what's the best way to do work. And in this process, there's really a focus on quality first, because quality is how you retain the customer. And ultimately, it acknowledges that we're seeking perfect production, to remove all the waste so that all the effort creates the value that the customer wants. and that is how to become more competitive in a manufacturing environment. And nothing about this is particularly fancy. It's really just a common sense, low cost improvement approach for working better together. So the challenge, though, is translating this concept from a manufacturing environment into the Puget Sound recovery environment, because the words we use in manufacturing or business practice might be different than the words we use when developing ecosystem services in a public space. So I think it's good to clarify some of these concepts, and I think it helps us clarify what we're doing in ecosystem recovery. So the first two words, who is our customer and what's our product? And I would say we need to be clear that the public is our customer, because as a government employee, we serve the people of our nation or our state or our jurisdiction. We're public servants. And that many of the ecosystem functions and goods and services are public trust resources, whether it's fisheries or the water supply, and that legislatures represent that public and thereby give us money or authority to do this work. So the public is our customer, which is sometimes a challenging position to be in. Secondarily, our product is, I often refer to it as ecosystem capital or ecosystem infrastructure, because we manage and modify ecosystems so they do things that we want them to do. And we use projects, quote unquote, to enhance or protect this ecosystem capital or this ecosystem infrastructure. So our work is, it's not to create permits or reports or attend meetings or generate emails. Those are all just means to an end. And the end is our product, which is an ecosystem condition. So in summary, we're in the business of producing ecosystem capital that we sell to public representatives to satisfy public values. And this is useful, as we see later, when we start thinking about how do we achieve a more efficient and better production system. So one of the challenges, however, is that our production system has a variety of inputs necessary to achieve production, to generate ecosystem capital. And these concepts came from a series of interviews that I conducted back in 2015. I talked to over 60 people in 9 different settings working on estuary restoration, and asked them, what do you need to complete a project, and what's stopping you from doing as many projects as you've wanted to do? And really 6 things consistently over and over again. We could identify 6 things that if we have them in place, we can do as much restoration as we want. And one was social agreement, that there is not an organized social opposition to the project that undermines the ability to complete the work, that there's some kind of agreement. We need regulatory compliance, so we need permission from agencies with power to do the work in the public sphere, in aquatic ecosystems, or changing a forest cover or something like that. There's often a regulatory piece to that. Thirdly, we need cash flow enough to complete all of the tasks. In addition, separate sometimes from cash flow is we need access to the land. So we need a willing landowner or land manager to allow us to do work on that land. And finally, we need both the human capital, so the number of people with the right skills to complete the work from start to finish, and the knowledge that the work we're doing is going to generate the ecosystem services that we desire, so that when we modify a stream or we modify a dike, that we're going to get what we want from it. And if we have all 6 of those things, then we're in a position to produce ecosystem services. And if we're missing one of those things, often the entire project can be derailed. So this brings us to a really important concept in this continuous improvement process, which is best expressed by the Japanese word Gemba, which is common in Japanese and is somewhat hard to translate. Oftentimes a reporter who is covering a story will describe themselves as being in Gemba, that they have gone to the place where the action is, where the facts can be found. In the manufacturing environment, Gemba is the factory floor, where the value is actually created, where the metal is combined with bolts to create something of value. And that Gemba is the place where the work is completed. And for us, the value comes when we change the ecosystem. So in ecosystem recovery, Gemba is at the restoration site or at the development site where ecosystem services are being protected through how the development is occurring, or where in the river the actual change is being done. And so that is Gemba, and it's usually the work is done by a staff person of a local agency or a special district like a conservation district or a tribal government or a nonprofit, or even a business or an individual landowner in the case of regulatory value creation. It's in the ecosystem, it's on the ground, it's local, it's a daily event. And that is Gemba. That is where the ecosystem is changed, and that is where the value is created. So the challenge is that we as a production community, we as the ecosystem community, we often refer to ourselves as the restoration community, are actually very complex in terms of our social institutions and how we're structured. Many of us are not at Gemba. We are arrayed in offices around the state or in different locations. Our structure of our production community has been created incrementally over time. We've been divided into strata with different kinds of authorities and relationships, from federal to state to local entities. We're divided into sectors and stovepipes, so that someone might be concerned about flood and another person is concerned about agriculture and another work group is concerned about fisheries or water quality. And that ultimately, even within those stovepipes or sectors, we're divided into these separate institutions. And even within the institution, we're divided into policy community, which might be separate from a technical community that looks at different parts of a problem. And this whole system is created ultimately by legislatures, and within legislatures there can be competing factions that have different ideas about what this system should look like. So even though it's a little chaotic, our industry has been created through a somewhat haphazard project, there are certain patterns that reoccur across the community. And one is that cash resources tend to flow into Gemba from a variety of different sources. Sometimes it moves stepwise from federal to state and state to into Gemba. In other cases, the cash is directly provided to Gemba. And in addition to the cash, there's also a lot of rules that come into how people can act. Sometimes the rules are associated with the money. Sometimes the rules are associated with the component of the ecosystem, so wetland or in-water work. But there's a lot of rules and chunks of cash that all flow in to try and achieve the production of value on site. And one of the challenges that each cell within this model, this kind of imaginary model of our production system, is operating as an individual hierarchical institution. And as such, there are certain sort of attributes that at play. That typically institutions try to resist external influence, because if they were constantly kind of being pulled this way and that, they would be less functional. Oftentimes, institutions try to control information to avoid saying the wrong thing at the wrong time or creating conflict. Institutions are seeking to be favored by outside forces, to look good. And so they'll seek advantage and ultimately try and cultivate a loyalty of their staff to the mission and purpose of the organization, just to be effective and to try and achieve the mission of the agency, so the agency continues to be effective over time. So all of these dynamics are sort of natural given the structure of our system, but they may or may not all support efficient production where value is created in Gemba. So in the manufacturing environment, to contrast, however, under this Kaizen kind of continuous improvement vision, the relationships are much simpler and cleaner than were sort of what we've inherited through the processes by which our industry has been created. And so in this case, we're very customer, in the case of sort of production, we're very customer focused. In fact, we have to understand, translate the values into our goals. What are we creating? What is our, quote, value proposition that we are offering back to the public? And in our cases, these are, often conflicting values, so we may have some complex goals. But ultimately, in the manufacturing world, we may recognize that the management doesn't necessarily create the value. Gemba is where the value is created. It's when someone is actually doing something that's changing the ecosystem. That's the delivery of value. That's how the ecosystem is changed. And that's what the customer, the public, is actually seeking from us. And so the function of management is to support Gemba by clarifying the objectives, like what are we trying to do out there? And the second is to remove constraints, make it as easy as possible to deliver the value, to create the value. And so this is from an on-the-ground perspective, this is a great way to structure our work because we are trying to minimize the amount of effort we spend in management, maximize the ability of those people that are in sight to create value by removing any constraints. And this is very aligned with our current needs in Puget Sound recovery to remove barriers, to increase efficiency, to use the resources we have as effectively as possible. And so in the manufacturing environment, there's really three things that are identified as important components of production efficiency. And the first and foremost is quality, that we are trying to maximize the satisfaction of values, in this case, producing ecosystem services. We want to produce durable, high quality ecosystem services. And we want to do so at the lowest cost possible. And we want to deliver that production at a desired rate and timing, which for us is basically as fast as possible, given the risks of population growth and climate change, historical injury, and the condition of fisheries and other natural resources. And so in this sort of production efficiency challenge, quality comes first because we might lose the customer. And it's remember who our customer is. Our customer is the public as represented by legislatures. So imagine what happens when we lose the public as a customer and we lose our legislatures as willing buyers of our product. That is a bad news situation for resource management. Then we want all of our resources to create value. And under a Kaizen view, any resource expenditure, anything we do that doesn't create value is waste. And our goal is to reduce waste so that all of our resources create value. And that's how we achieve production efficiency. This means that there are some things we have to do that don't create value because otherwise our production would fail. But the goal is to minimize the work that we do that isn't directly producing value. And so in the manufacturing environment, there's a lot of effort expended to try to understand what is this work that doesn't directly produce value. And here's some examples, that with either starting and stopping, waiting, producing too much that we don't actually need, like for example, a really ornate plan that we don't use or that becomes obsolete quickly as kind of a surplus production, storing and trying to find resources again, forgetting stuff that we have, which is similar to sort of searching or pursuing information. How much time do we spend trying to find out some bit or detail that's not readily available or is difficult to find or depends on someone who's on vacation? Any defects in production, projects that don't work, are also a kind of waste. Any just movement as we go here and go there and attend this meeting or spend 4 hours driving there, all that movement is waste because it's not generating value. Staff that are overloaded and spend effort just trying to manage their overfull plates, changing directions, doing it this way, that way, reorganization, not using the talent in our organization. These are all examples of waste, ways in which we're doing work that doesn't produce ecosystem services directly. It's just friction in the machine. And the beauty of waste elimination as a strategy is that every time we eliminate waste, we're basically increasing our budget. We are getting free money out of our existing system simply by reorganizing how we do work. And we always talk about needing more resources. This is a way to obtain resources while improving our performance without having to seek additional legislative appropriations. So there are a number of strategies that have emerged out of this kind of manufacturing viewpoint, and these are sort of this is the toolkit by which we can do this work. And we're going to focus really on continuous improvement as a cornerstone of that. But really, when you look into what continuous improvement and the A3 process that we're going to talk about does, it's really part of a whole system. And so there's, I think, ultimately, in order to improve something, there needs to be some standard that you're operating to. If you're making it up every single time and everything we do is a unique event, then you can't really improve it because we don't have a standard to improve from. Organizing our workplaces so they're uncluttered and they're focused on, they're systematically set up in order to achieve production as part of sort of setting the foundation. There's a concept of just in time, which is don't produce more than you need before you need it, and make sure it gets there right when you need it, not earlier or later. And that keeps the whole system rolling smoothly. Total quality control is a concept, and it sounds a little sort of controlling. But what that means is not that you have total control over your workers, but rather that everyone in the system is working to improve quality. So everyone knows what quality is, and everyone is involved in increasing quality. And part of that comes through what the Kaizen world calls good policy deployment, so that the objectives of what we are doing are clear to everyone, and they're not held or changed, or it's a shared resource. What we're working toward, and how we work toward that, and how we value that. I think it's important to reflect on sort of the cultural component of Kaizen. And this is a quote from Masaki Imai, who described that Western managers may be impatient or undervalue Kaizen because of a fascination with innovation, of some new way of doing things, rather than continuously focusing on improving how human effort is deployed, on improving morale through the work so that we feel like our work is valued, through improving training and teamwork, by getting everyone involved, by cultivating self-discipline in our employees and rewarding it through good systems of communication. So this concept of Kaizen. There are a number of sort of rituals. We'll look at the sort of A3 concept, but really the underlying concept is not about strategies or techniques for fixing how people work, but it's rather about building a culture around work so that we are emphasizing our work together for shared objectives, and we're all involved in increasing the quality of our work and reducing costs and increasing delivery. So how might this apply to Puget Sound? And I'm not interested in creating some new institution or some new board or that we have more than enough mechanisms in place. We need to simply make the mechanisms we have more and more efficient over time. Maybe we'll eventually get smart enough that we can actually reduce the number of mechanisms and boards and such. So looking at what we have, I think the cornerstone of all of this work is what I'd call the coordinator community, coming back to that original concept. And the reason is that the coordinator community is in Gemba or very close to Gemba. They're like they're like the managers or the coordinators on the factory floor that are working with the people that are creating value, but they have enough time to communicate to each other and communicate with other components of the system. The other four pieces that I think are necessary for us to do this interagency standard for waste reduction, two of them live in the agencies themselves. In particular, the leadership of the agencies has to believe that waste reduction is valuable and important, and this helps the affected programs participate. And the affected programs are the people that actually do the policy and deployment for the agency. So there has to be this understanding between the leadership and the affected programs, whether they're regulatory or grant making or technical assistance programs, that this continuous improvement driven by Gemba is what we want to be doing. And so from that, the Ecosystem Coordination Board is a great place to bring this all together, because the leadership is ostensibly present or represented at the Ecosystem Coordination Board, where we can look at problems that go beyond just a single agency. For regulatory review, typically there's 5 or 6, plus maybe up to 8 tribes involved in reviewing individual actions. So rarely a lot of our sources of waste can be generated through friction between different processes among agencies, and that's an important source of waste if we're going to be serious about improving our processes. It's not just about processes within one program or within an agency where we are already sort of positioned for improvement. It's about improving processes that cross over among multiple agencies, and that's where our challenge is. So the fourth component that I'm putting here are the funders. In some cases, it might take a little bit of extra capacity in the process of our doing the work to achieve an improvement. And I'm not talking about creating a whole new thing. We have a number of discretionary resources within our existing ecosystem management system to provide additional small amounts of funding in the course of project work to improve the system. And I think this is the best and most efficient way to achieve these improvements, is to sort of use our existing funding mechanisms and efficiently achieve that improvement. And what I'm after here is not, again, a new system, but rather just standardizing, to use that Kaizen language, standardizing how we do improvement among agencies. So the other interesting sort of rabbit hole or challenge that we have to be careful about is that not all of our waste is really a production problem or a production issue. They're not all under agency control. They're not all unintended consequences. In fact, we have a lot of our potential waste are actually unresolved conflicts that are under sort of broad cultural control. So that this is a landscape of what I call political problems, that we just don't agree on who has the right or the authority to make a decision in an agricultural buffer, for example, or something like that. And so these are problems of conflicting values. What I'm focused on here today is focusing on problems that result from poorly designed systems. And so that's really this zone, this sort of agency-controlled, unintended consequence landscape, so that we can stop wasting our effort on these kinds of problems and instead be able to focus more effort and staff time and labor on solving political problems through having more conversations with each other, and also reducing sort of the low morale that's generated by expending effort that is not creating value, that is wasteful effort. And so the purpose here is to identify our waste in routine activities, the things that we do over and over again, to standardize those routine activities so that we talk about what's the best way to get this work done. And then once we have an idea, we can start to improve those standards over time. A standard is not a rigid thing. It's a starting point for an improvement process that allows us to talk about how to do things better together. And what this does in part is it helps clarify where we have political problems by separating these kind of production problems and all the friction they create from the truly political problems that where we need to get together and talk about what our values are and what our shared values are. So a Puget Sound strategy ultimately and a standard is built to it's essentially a ritual. The process that is proposed in a lot of lean management is to use an A3 process. And that all that refers to is the size of a sheet of paper. A3 is the international standard, roughly equivalent to our 11 by 17. However, again, it's the superficial quality is not what's important. What's important is the cultural habits underlying the concept. So in this case, once we identify waste, either it's causing a reduction of quality, an increase in cost, a slowdown in delivery, we're looking for things that are really creating a significant impact in terms of quality, cost, or delivery. And then we go to Gemba. We don't sit in our offices or talk amongst ourselves. We go to where the waste is occurring, and we examine what the Japanese call gembutsu, the things that matter. What is causing the waste? We look at the application forms. We look at the processes. We look at how things are happening, where they happen, not in abstract. And at that point, we can ask some simple questions like, is there a standard? If there is no standard, then creating a standard is really the first step. What's the best way to do this? Let's establish that as a community. And then secondarily, are there housekeeping issues? Do we need to simplify or sort of unclutter the process in a way? And ultimately, at that point, we can start looking at root cause. What is causing that waste? Is there a reason why we do it the way we do? Most systems exist because someone created them that way for some reason. So the root cause analysis is about understanding what is it that we're attempting to get through our wasteful system, and how can we achieve those goals through a less wasteful system. And at that point, we can start exploring what are the countermeasures that we can employ to improve the system, to improve our standard. And this whole process, there's a Japanese concept that's really important for how we go about this process and how this process can work. If this investigative process is punitive, if it's intended to make people look bad and punish them, then we are going to fail. We're going to hide our waste. We're going to avoid having hard conversations because that seems like the purpose of the conversation is to create, punishment. And so there's a term that the Japanese use, nemawashi, which is the process of preparing for change. And that the way you prepare for change is by sort of carefully gathering all of the information and materials and working with all of the people, and they equate it to transplanting a tree, because nemawashi literally means going around the roots, where you, if you want to transplant a tree, you cut the root ball, you prepare the hole, you amend the hole you're going to, you've gathered some tarp and materials to be able to hold the root ball together as you move it. Everyone agrees where the tree's going, you get the labor together, and then the process of moving the tree is really very simple because you've done all the work ahead of time. You've gone around the roots, and so then you just move the tree and you're done because you've done the preparatory work. So this A3 process is a preparatory process for solving the problem. And it is not necessarily done in big committees, but rather you have a person who owns the A3 that's talking to everyone that needs to be talked to, that's exploring the root cause, that's understanding whether the countermeasures will work, and is doing that work efficiently, because you're not having big tent processes in which people don't necessarily always say what they mean or say everything they're thinking, or are even able to speak if a few people are spending all the time talking, or you don't have time, but rather you're sending someone with an A3 from place to place, working around the routes to come up with the countermeasures, and so that when you're ready, you just adjust the standard, you check, and you do it over again. So this is an A3 process is a cultural phenomena about assigning someone to develop that A3. And my proposal is that the people who are best positioned to do this work, to do Nemawashi, are our coordination community. They're the ones that are on the ground. They're the ones in communication with the people in Gemba who are experiencing waste, and they're also in a position to take a little bit of their time and to go beyond just listing barriers, but actually doing the Nemawashi necessary to actually solve the barrier in collaboration with agencies, with the support of leadership, and perhaps with small resource allocations from funders where necessary. So my proposal to the coordination community that I'm making, it's now just getting on January, and of course we may or may not have a federal government shutdown, which will sort of push us all back. But I'm imagining that this kind of process, how we do this, it's so well developed and established, the practices in the manufacturing community, and that the translation is relatively simple. I think we're going to be able to do this very efficiently. And I'm imagining we'll have some kind of scoping discussion where those people that want to help design our initial standard, all we're doing is creating a standard, agreeing to a standard that largely already exists through the lean management system. We're going to scope that discussion. We'll have an all-day work session when we'll just work through front to back. This is what we believe our standard is, and this is how it works. I think we'll have a chance to take that concept, to take that product around and do Nemawashi with our leadership, with other people, to let sort of check in, make sure that this is the right solution set. And I'm hoping that people that participate will be able to help with that work. And ultimately, then we'll have a concluding discussion where we make sure we're all on the same page. We're going to kind of gather our stuff together, and then we go back to ecosystem coordination board review, and then we're ready to roll. This is not a complicated process. It's just, I think one of the big challenges is knowing which sources of waste to work on first, and whether and where we have the capacity within the recovery community to do the A3 process. Who is going to be the A3 stewards? How do we empower them? How do we help them have the right tools and the right questions and the right process so that they can be efficient? And then how do we use the ECB as a forum for engaging agency leadership, identifying the right people in agencies to be part of that Nemawashi process in order to develop the countermeasures that ultimately oftentimes I hear people say we can't do this, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the surplus capacity. What we're doing here is we're reducing our daily waste. We're reducing the time we spend over and over and over again doing things that don't add value. And by doing so, we will increase our efficiency, we'll increase the quality of our work, we'll decrease the cost of our work, we'll increase the delivery time of our work. And I don't think really, in my mind, it's not a matter of, do we have the ability? I think this is work that anyone in a business environment does because they must do it. And I think for us, the reasons are just as compelling, that this is work that we must do and should do because we care about quality, we care about cost, and we care about delivery time. And this is, I think, the most efficient, lowest risk, lowest cost way to be able to achieve those goals. Thank you.